Good evening. I know today's episode is a little bit late, but I ended up getting absorbed by one of the games on today's docket, and then I went away with my family for the weekend. So, on the one hand, the episode's a few days late, on the other hand, I've got lots to talk about, and it's not a month late like August's episode. Incidentally, despite how much I'm about to talk about it, the game I have a lot to talk about isn't Dishonored 2. Also, I'm recovering from a slight cold, so if I sound a bit off, I do apologise. Hopefully, it's not completely unbearable. Without getting too much into my personal history with the Dishonored series, this is far from my first playthrough. Instead of just talking about the game generally, I want to mention briefly an aspect of the design of the Dishonored games which I think works really well, and that's the environment design, how it impacts the level design and how that impacts how you play. My favourite examples in Dishonored 2, for instance, are Edge of the World and the Grand Palace. For starters, the atmosphere of both of these levels is just astounding. I really love both of them. The way Edge of the World gives you a massive chunk of the city to wander around is just so cool, being able to clamber up onto all these different rooftops and get a good look around, a vantage point over everything. The detail that's put into everything really fills the space with life, and I think that's incredibly effective because it lends itself to the design of the game. I think this is something I'll talk a little bit more about in my next section, but the fact that it's not just a conflict zone, but rather a space with real people, so to speak, characters who just want to get on with their lives in peace, really adds an extra dimension to how I approach the world, which I don't think I get in other games. I think the fact that you've got innocent civilians in any given encounter, and other factions aside from just your guys and the guys you're trying to kill, really helps emphasize the immersive sim design. So, for instance, in Lady Boyle's party in Dishonored 1, is it Lady Boyle's party? No, in the brothel mission. It's the brothel mission in Dishonored 1. You can hand over a couple of targets to the rival gang and just leave them to deal with it instead of kind of dealing with them yourself. Obviously, you still have to use the stealth and violence mechanics to reach those results, as it is a stealth action game. But having those extra modes of interaction with the story make it feel like you're having more of an impact on other people's lives as well as your own. And I think that gives Dishonored an extra edge for me. In Dishonored 2, the Grand Palace feels structured a lot more like a Hitman level, like having the large but more isolated environment to work through. I also just think that the Grand Palace is an excellent demonstration of the art design of Dishonored 2. Like, it's really striking, and has this look of a super modern mansion owned by some rich bastard who absolutely deserves to die. But yeah, the art direction and environment design go hand in hand beautifully well, and the way the environment design lends itself to the mechanical design is, I think, very effective for an immersive sim. Hi, just quickly editing Ian here. I'm tuning in just to say I realised this section was kind of less coherent than I wanted it to be, so I'm really sorry about that. I would like to talk more about immersive sims like Dishonored and Deus Ex in the future at some point, so hopefully we can come back to this segment and talk more coherently about it. But what I was trying to get across was that the environment design in Dishonored is really good, and the level design is very well intertwined with the core gameplay loop. I like Dishonored, is what I'm trying to say. I started playing through the 2017 Prey last month. While a lot of people group it alongside Dishonored, as it is made by Arcane, I think it's a lot more like the Shock series, System Shock, Bioshock, etc. It's definitely good, I just kind of don't have a lot to say about it. The environment and art design is fantastic. I like the different routes and approaches you can take. Just looking around Talos 1 and rummaging through tables feels fun and engaging, which can't be said for a lot of games. It's just that it feels more like sci-fi action, survival horror, somewhere in between Alien Isolation and Dead Space than it does a Dishonored-style immersive sim. I think this comes back to I don't feel like my actions are having an impact on anyone else, because everyone's dead, at least so far. I'm only about a third of the way through, I think, but, I don't think it's fun, but it's definitely not scratching the immersive sim Dishonored kind of itch for me, and I'm, as a result, not enjoying it as much. But I have realised I'm very excited to play Deathloop soon, as that might scratch the itch. Unclear, we'll see. Okay, this is the big one for today. I played through The Sinking City in like 3 to 4 days, and it's making me feel like a crazy person. I have massively edited down this section to talk about one specific mechanic from the game, but this is the reason this video is nearly 10 days late. The game is not very good, but has burrowed its way into my brain, put an armchair down and a rug, and refuses to leave. You may recall, if you've watched some of my previous videos or follow me on Twitter, that I am a game developer. The reason this game fascinates me so much is that I recently penned a design doc for a detective game and got into some fairly nitty-gritty detail about how I'd want the mechanics set up. As part of researching that project, alongside all the real-world crime and mystery stuff, I started adding detective games to my playlist, as well as, detective serial stuff, TV series and books. The Sinking City I knew was a Lovecraft-inspired game with detective elements, and I love a good Lovecraft story, so seeing it on sale for like £5, I thought, oh, I'll go on then, and was then absolutely bewildered to learn that about 50% of this game's mechanics were already sat in my design doc. What was even more bewildering for me is that I had made notes against things, so if I'd got a section about a mechanic, I'd made a little note that would say something like, if you need to meet specific conditions before you can search for information, it will be frustrating. But that was just kind of a theory, and then I started playing through this and saw in actual practice before my eyes just how frustrating it could be. On the one hand, it was extremely vindicating to be like, yes, I knew exactly how this would and wouldn't work, and on the other hand, there is a developer or team of developers at Frogwares who has my brain, and I really want to sit down and talk at length with them because that sounds really cool. A sort of 20-hour game made brief, The Sinking City is a Lovecraftian mystery story where you play as House MD suffering severe Vicodin withdrawal as he stumbles around a remote fishing village being taken over by a doomsday cult. It has an insipid combat element, which doesn't need to be there, some of the worst Lovecraftian horror I've ever seen, and the way voice actors pronounce Innsmouth never stopped annoying me. However, the thing we're really here to talk about is the detective mechanics, specifically the way you research information in the game. For the purposes of this discussion, I think it's best I make clear that I played through the game with the detective difficulty set to its very highest, and the combat difficulty set to its lowest. The other bit of context is that the way the research in this game works is you go to a research table, and you have 4 options of criteria, and each of them has a set of options within it, usually 3 or 4, but sometimes more. And you have to get 3 of those lined up in order for it to find the correct document that you're looking for. So, I have long held the theory that a detective game with a focus on the mystery should be driven by player knowledge, not character knowledge. To explain what that means, let's take Disco Elysium as an example. D is a detective game where the focus is not on the mystery so much as it is on the roleplaying. If the player never actually pays attention to any of the crime scenes, they'll probably still be able to reach an ending just by following different quest objectives and picking some of the obvious correct dialogue options, because Harry was still paying attention, so key bits of information get noted down and you get told where you need to go. Obviously, the game is enhanced by engaging with the mystery aspect, but it's not a necessity for seeing credits. This is not a bad thing for Disco Elysium, and I don't want anyone to think this is a criticism. This is just an example of a game which has a different design focus. By contrast, if a detective game is focused solely on the mystery and investigation, like The Sinking City is, making certain steps of the plot rely on the character knowing things can cause a disconnect between player and player character. A good example of this is when, in The Sinking City, I found some evidence which said that some attackers were priests from an old local church. I thought to myself, I'll go to the library and look for old local religious books. So I did, and turned up diddly squat. After running around for a while, I worked out that I needed to put 2 thoughts together in the mind cabinet thing, so Reed goes, I should go to the library and research old churches, at which point using exactly the same research terms as earlier does result in a piece of evidence. This was really frustrating for me, because I for a while, I'd completely forgotten about the mind cabinet, and so could not figure out what I needed to do to get that piece of evidence, because I'd completely explored the crime scene, and there was nowhere else I could go. And this feels like taking a really strong investigative system, noticing that because each category has 3 or 4 search terms on average, it would be easy to brute force with a bit of patience, and then shooting it in the knees to try and rectify the problem. My preferred solution would be to have you look up more stuff through the course of the campaign, facilitating more search terms in each category, then making it so that each valid search returned a couple of bits of flavor text as well as the useful evidence, so the player has to essentially simulate rifling through a cabinet of papers to try and find the one they need. This avoids the problem where the player has worked something out but can't seem to get it to click in-game because the player character hasn't worked it out, while also heavily disincentivizing some players from trying to brute force answers to problems. This also means that all information and evidence can be acquired from the word go, if you know where to look, but won't make any sense without the surrounding context of events, so there's no reasonable way to pick it out. The point I'm trying to make is that The Sinking City, despite not being a very good game overall, has a surprisingly strong foundational core, which I think is easy to miss. I certainly would have missed it if I hadn't spent the last several months obsessing over how best to tackle the problem of designing a good detective game driven by player action. In fact, I'd speculate that a lot of the devs who worked on it could likely have pointed out these issues given a chance, but time and budgetary restraints stopped them from being able to fully tackle them, just like the technical issues and clearly larger scope the game initially had. A little thing which caught my eye is that it's really obvious you were at some point or another supposed to be able to clamber over stuff in a pseudo parkour system, but that was later scrapped for some reason. All over the map you can see obvious staircases and opportunities to clamber over obstacles, but if you go up to them and mash the spacebar, Reed just stands there looking confused and picking fluff out of his belly button. In conclusion, if you really, really want a good mystery story, the first 2/3 of The Sinking City might scratch that itch for you, but overall it's probably not really worth your time. It really was worth my time though as a budding designer, and I encourage anyone out there with an interest in game design or game development to really take the time to think about each of the mechanics in some of your favourite games, to think about why they're there, how they interact and how they could be improved. I got started with this stuff by watching Hbomberguy videos years ago. I don't always agree with what he's saying about stuff. His Dark Souls 2 video has at least one point which irks me, but on the whole he really knows what he's talking about and is definitely worth learning from. Sometime in the future, I will announce a detective game project, and you will be able to trace it back to this very video. My long-suffering partner, on the other hand, will be able to trace it back to that one time we were lying in bed, and I said, I want to make a detective game, and then didn't stop talking about it for somewhere between 8 months and 6 years. Sorry, darling. I've played plenty of other things this month, but most of them have been mentioned before, and I think I've filled my time with the most interesting stuff. The point of this series was to find excuses to talk about aspects of game design rather than to painstakingly document every single game that I played in a month. If you want the list of games not already mentioned today, Spiritfarer, Sea of Thieves, Vampire Survivors, Mario Kart, Tetris, and 2048. I kinda gave up on Dragon Age Origins this month. I'd assumed I was like a quarter of the way through the game, but in preparation for this video I looked up the quest list and found out I was like 2/3 of the way through, so I'm gonna try to go back to it this month after I finish The Sinking City. Oh, I wrote that line a while ago. I kinda gave up on Dragon Age Origins this month. I'd assumed I was like a quarter of the way through the game, but in preparation for this video, I looked up the quest list and found out I was like 2/3 of the way through, so I'm gonna try and go back to that this month after I finish this video. Try and storm to the end in a couple of days before I finish up Prey. Before anyone pops up in the comments to tell me that maybe I just don't like RPGs or something like that, it wasn't the prospect of the game being long that bothered me, I was just not engaged by the specific story and characters. Like, they're fine, they just feel a bit flat and bland. And some of the quests felt quite padded. But it seems that it's not actually so bad, so I'll try and finish it. Other than that, over November, I'll actually finish playing through Prey, maybe make a start on Deathloop, depending on what kind of mood I'm in. I definitely need to keep chipping away at the Outer Wilds if I can, probably grab something from my pile of shame, games that I ought to have played but haven't. I'm a solid chunk of the way through Half-Life 1, so I'll probably finish that at some point, or if I'm in the mood I might try and jump back into Kingdom Come Deliverance, which is still on hold. I'll see how I go. That's kind of all I've got for you this month. Let me know what you've been playing recently in the comments, and I'll see you all in the next one.